Hello and welcome to this edition of the Halcyon Show. My name's Lon Wisely and I'm going to be your host for this episode. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed some of the more recent videos I've done, Super Sports Matching and Grid Retro Enhanced. But have you ever wondered what it would be like if the guys who made air hockey games got together with the guys who made Dynasty Warriors? Wouldn't that be a pretty epic experience? Well, the game we're reviewing today might speak to that because we're going to be talking about a game called Castle Break, a game that takes air hockey, meets conquest modes, meets top-down shooters, meets Sally. No, that's not right. But anyway, nevertheless, Castle Break, the idea being that you've got an air hockey type setting where you'll progress through multiple levels trying to take down the other opponent. The only difference is that instead of scoring points as such, it's set out in a combat style scenario. So you have two lanes, middle ground, which you can't pass through. You've got a robot. Oftentimes the other team has a robot, but that's not necessarily always the case. And then you go back and forth. Cannonballs are fired from the opposing side and it's your job to bat them away, all the while maintaining your defenses, all the while maintaining an offense, keeping your soldiers alive and breaking down the defenses of your enemy. And as always, let's go to the notes and see what they have to say. Arkanoid / air hockey with explosions, shooting and building. Use your mouse like an air hockey striker to kick enemy bombs back into the evil black castle. Destroy enemy towers with bombs, rockets and lasers, because they are evil. Don't forget to protect your little dudes. The game was released on 19th February 2019. The developer and publisher is Pauloodra. The game is currently priced at $3.99. The features include an original mix of Arkanoid Air Hockey physics, shooting and building, explosions, lasers, tower bugs, everything you like. Also loud chanting it does have that in fairness. Develop your own tactics, concentrate on kicking, shooting or building, or everything by choosing the right upgrades. Protect your lesser brothers in arms and don't expect they ever help you back. One-handed mouse control only options, lets you drink your coffee and play at the same time, but try not to spill it because some of the levels are really hard. Yeah, they are. Beat 30 levels campaign and then the endless mode. Be warned, only for those who have endless time. It has global leaderboards, everyone knows how cool you are. I want to touch on that last part. When I was trying to review this game, I noticed something very, very quickly, which is that the game always reboots from the start. Now, when you've got 30 levels in a specific game, and the idea is that you've got to traverse all 30 levels, it kind of helps to have a save option, or it kind of helps to have an autosave function. I only realized this on my third playthrough. On the first playthrough, I just figured, nah, I've only gone through 2 or 3 levels, maybe it hasn't saved. Second time round, got through, I think, to level 14 or 15, and then just for whatever reason, had to put the game down to go do something else. Booted the game up a third time and went, oh, I've got to do all that again now. Which is dependent on your point of view. If you like the kind of arcade style game that's going to allow you to play through it all again, fair enough. I would argue, however, that if your game is predicated on a certain degree of progression, maybe it needs to have a save function. I get that the high score option kind of offsets that because it doesn't matter when you quit or when you get beat, it's the high score that matters. But when there's 30 levels, I kind of want to experience all 30 levels. I don't want to have to restart all the other levels again because I've already beaten them.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
I will also say that there's a weird moment at around the 8 or 9 level mark where the difficulty ramps up a lot. Like you struggle to maintain the momentum. Like you'll be in these dogfights that get really grindy. And then it swaps over into what I think the transition from is like the green fields to the white field where it obviously is snowbound. And it gets super easy again. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but we'll probably explore that in a few seconds. But let's talk about some of the on-the-field aspects, shall we? Before we get started though, let's just take a moment to kind of build back what the gameplay is. So the idea is that cannonballs will be fired from your opposing side, and you're always facing upwards in terms of your progression because you're progressing through the levels. And you're going to be batting away the cannonballs a lot. Now, the cannonballs will only stay active on a field for a certain amount of time. They won't be perpetual, so they'll explode. And they don't do damage to your character. Your character is completely impervious to any kind of harm because they act as like the battering ram. It would have been interesting to see what would happen if you'd integrated like a life bar into sort of the main character. That might have made it even more perilous. If you're gonna bat the cannonballs away, do you run the risk of batting it as it's about to explode? But nevertheless, that's not the case here. But it does introduce an interesting mechanic, which is that do you focus on the cannonballs? Do you focus on them to try and destroy your enemy by batting them over? They do significant amounts of damage, and probably the easiest way of being able to destroy your opposing forces. Obviously the opposing forces have defenses like wood and stone and other materials, walls that you have to hit perpetually to break them down. You also have other enemies that will try to attack you, other bots that try to attack you, and your forces will deplete over time if you don't defend them enough. Now, there's only so many ways that you can do this. Again, you maintain your defenses by rebuilding those walls, or you can go on the offensive. At the end of each level, when you start the new phase, you'll be gifted with one of 7 power-ups, and these power-ups will vary from being more offensive, to replenishing your forces, to giving you buffs during the course of the battle. The game also has sort of traps, I guess you would call them, on both sides. So you have pools. Basically what they form as is basically rudimental defenses against the cannibals. You can't ever get a cannibal past them. If you hit the pool, it just falls right in. So the idea is that you're only going to be limited to a certain area of the wall that you can be able to attack directly with the cannibals, which lends back into the tactics of this game. Do you want to focus more on concentrating on battling the cannibals, where there can be up to 2 or 3 cannibals on the field at any one time? And of course they do damage to both sides, so you have to focus if you're going to be focusing on the cannibals, because an stray cannibal can bounce off some of their defenses, say a wall or the opposing robot, and hit yours and do significant damage. So do you focus on that, or do you focus on maintaining the defenses, or do you focus on the attacking element, which is another interesting mechanic of this game. You have a reticule in front of your robot that lets you know where you're going to be shooting. You've got access to machine guns and rockets and other weapons that you're going to be able to utilize to break down defenses, destroy the enemy units just on their own if you want to. It adds an interesting back and forth. Now, the problem I see with this, again, is that it takes a long time sometimes to get past some of the levels when they become more grindy, especially in the sort of middle phase of each level, where, let's say for the sake of argument, you've both taken significant damage, and really the only thing in play is the cannonball. Then it's just a question of who can outlast who in terms of a game of air hockey. This can become quite frustrating at times because some of the levels are designed in such a way that the angles of the cannonballs, it's not easy to be able to hit the shot, which of course is the state of play in air hockey. But I always found whenever I was playing real life air hockey that there's this weird, if it's a design of the field, or if it's a design of the board, or the design of the table, or wherever you happen to be playing, it just seems to just naturally attract the puck. So whenever you're sort of batting it away, you always have to be acutely aware of that very small section, otherwise you are invariably going to overreach and it's going to bounce back and go into your goal. In this game it's kind of the opposite, because it just feels like a really Herculean task at times to get the cannonball where you want it to go. I would have perhaps appreciated maybe instead of the reticule firing in front of you, because you know that you can't fire in multiple directions, you can only fire directly in front of you. That's kind of said. What would have been nice is to see what the angle of the ball is going to be, or the cannonball is going to be, so that you can more strategically aim it to be able to do the damage that you want to do. The game also introduces other environmental issues, like fog, for instance. So towards the latter part of some of the middle stages, you're going to get the field just covered in fog. And what happens there is that the cannonball is going to fire up into the air, bounce back down, and when it lands, you can't see it. So these levels are just crapshoots in essence. You're just going to be flailing around trying to hit the cannonball. Once you hit it once, you're never going to see it again. If it bounces back, you're going to have literally no chance to see it. I would have instead designed this a little bit differently. I understand the need to make it more difficult, but what I would have suggested is perhaps instead of a large black cannonball, which is what you're used to seeing, maybe just have sort of the ember of the fuse so that you can still track it, but it's more difficult to follow because it's smaller. That would have made it feel a little fairer and incorporated more of the tactics that the rest of the game has into these modes. And then we get into the bots/knights. Again, not always does the enemy team have one of these, and sometimes they have multiple ones of them, but I like the interesting design. It's kind of Shovel Knight-ish, if you remember that game. Basically horns and very rudimental designs. The movement of these knights is only ever lateral and forwards and backwards, but never across the line, and it's the same for both sides. They don't directly attack each other or do damage, but they're the ones that are chief for deploying defenses and attacks. On your knight, for instance, you can cycle through different attacks and different defense modes. So you can decide to build stone walls or decide to build wooden walls, depending on what resources you have at your disposal at any given time. Same with the weapons. And again, because you have chief control, you can decide if you want to be on the offensive or defensive and never worry about a penalty for doing so. But the overall prop I would give this game is that it takes a very simple design, air hockey, and introduces elements that make it both RPG-ish, strategic and tactical, which air hockey, really, which is just, I just always thought it was just hit it as hard as you can to make it bounce as often as possible to kind of get the angles right. But because of the games having multiple cannonballs, because it having different offensive capabilities, and the overall goal of you not only destroying your opponent, but also protecting your knights who serve really no purpose other than really to be your life bar, considering that your bot is not expendable. It's a really fun arcade style game. The only criticism I have is that I'd want to play the later levels. I'd want to be able to experience these without having to cycle all 14, 15 levels again. It's just very frustrating when that happens. But at the same time, it is fun. It's just that it can devolve into a bit of a grindy gameplay at times when it's a bit of a stalemate. It's kind of similar again to air hockey, I suppose. Some power-ups to maybe break this stalemate, maybe a combo meter, maybe some kind of high score accumulator, something to break the deadlock at times, at least to favour you, especially when the computer has numerous advantages at times in the game. Would have been nice to break up the monotony, but ultimately the gameplay is rewarding, satisfying, fun as all hell, and epic considering what we're about to talk about, the presentation and design. So let's start with the soundtrack. It hits you the second you boot up the game. It's epic, metal, intensive, constantly perpetual moving sounding. You just want to get the next one, next one, next one, next one, and it's great. The flourishes at the end of each level. So when you destroy the enemies, you get a big flourish, do-do-do-do-do. Kind of, it reminds me a bit of Zelda-ish, I imagine, or Mario, just kind of a big flourish to let you know you did it good, but you got another one coming. You're not quite done yet. And overall, the design of the game is rudimental but functional. There's nothing that stands out in terms of the design of this game. There's nothing groundbreaking, but I would argue that because the focus of the gameplay is much on the combat and much on just this little cannonball that's flying back and forth, it doesn't need the most elaborate graphics in the world because the gameplay is so tight and functional and responsive. The game's graphics do what they need to do, which is to highlight little quirks about the game, like explosions, bang, and the tiny things like the track marks as the knights traverse the battlefields, the explosions, the fire, the knights dying, the explosions of the enemies, the destruction of the enemy base. It's all, again, rudimental, but in that really fun, quirky, colourful way, and I will give the game props for that. It certainly wasn't boring to look at. And let's also talk about the game's interface for a second. Again, because it's all mouse-based, it's super smooth, super controlled. I never felt the controls were cheap, especially when you're dealing with air hockey. Sometimes the touch mechanics don't work and it feels like you're flailing at air. Other times, with firing mechanics, they can feel unresponsive or just a little bit sluggish. In both instances, this game felt responsive and just tight. Whenever you wanted to fire weapons, you felt like you could fire weapons. Whenever you wanted to hit the cannonballs or bounce back and forth or just race across the battlefield, you could do it as quickly as your heart's desired. The only downside I would argue is that there's not a great level of interface with regards to what materials and weapons you have at your disposal. The knight will change depending on what power-ups you boost, which is a nice little touch, a nice little aesthetic touch. But I would just prefer a little bit more on the interface, especially considering there's a large section of the game that's just basically there for the knights to be populated. I get that that serves as your life bar, but a couple of little things down there just to let you know that you have X amount of machine gun bullets or lasers or building materials would make it a bit easier to notice in the middle of a dogfight. I also like that the tutorial mode is right in your face the second you boot up the game. You don't get a choice and it's literally just click, 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 click. And the tutorial mode really just serves to let you know how easy the game is. It's super easy to get stuck into it. It really warrants not a lot of explanation as to how you're going to play. Mouse to move, spacebar to pause, click, 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 and you're on your way. But the fact that the developer took time to say, look, I'm not going to assume you know how to play my game having never played it before, here's a couple of tidbits, then I always appreciate that fact. In fact, if I turn to the developer for a second, because again, as you're probably aware by now, I try to correspond with every developer of the games that I review. So Pauloodra on Twitter mentioned the fact that this game is his first step in game development. Main goal is to develop a small, fun game by himself to get as much experience as possible, and actually excuses the poor design as a result of that, which I don't have a problem with the design at all. I think because it's rudimental and colourful, the focus can be on the gameplay. And again, that's the biggest advice I could give to any game dev that's looking to make a brand new game from scratch. Just make sure the gameplay is fun and rewarding and not cheap. The aesthetics will take care of themselves. And indeed, as I always like to do, a bit of insight here. So pro tips that can help get past level 30 and beyond. When you win a level, you get all blocks that remain from the enemy that has on the last level, so try not to destroy them all, otherwise it will make your defense naked on the next level. Laser penetrates anything except mirrors, so build up mirrors to deflect enemy lasers, and also never shoot mirrors with your laser, break them before that. On Death Fog levels, time might be more important than defense, so try to use your weapons more to beat the level faster. So yeah, so basically, as I've kind of alluded to, which is on the fog levels where you can't see as much, it is more incumbent upon you to be more offensive because you just genuinely can't defend against what you can't see. So that's a good point, and obviously they've built defenses to counter some of the more powerful weapons. And that speaks to the design impetus of the developer to make a fun experience that's not overly complicated and complex, but is convoluted enough to keep it interesting as you play through levels. And I must give the game that compliment, as I was cycling from level to level to level to level, even when the battles became more dogged. It's one of those games that I could just, I know I could play another 5 minutes of this. Yeah, I could play another 10 minutes of this. Yeah, I could play another half an hour of this. It's one of those great little experiences that just keeps egging you on and egging you on. And that's the best type of game to play. So would I recommend this game? Yeah, I think the price point is maybe a little higher than I would like, considering, again, the value that games like Bad Business and Storm provide you for a relatively similar level of content. However, I'm not going to argue with the price point. I think it's reasonably priced considering what it is. It's got a ton of content to offer. The gameplay is responsive and super, super fun. It's got a ton of progression because 30 levels is really, really hard to get through, trust me. And the endless level will provide you with the endless content that you need. The high score level keeps it competitive. And the fact that this is the developer's first crack of the whip, I really love to see where they take the concept. Will they add a multiplayer element, which is probably the only thing this game is sorely missing. Considering it's an air hockey game, switch it from vertical to horizontal, get a multiplayer element in, and you've got a really fun game on your hands here. I get that maybe that from a ergonomic perspective wouldn't be the easiest thing to do. Maybe you need to keep it vertical and just invert it for an opposing player online. But certainly if you could map the keys to a keyboard and bring it back to that old school online type game when it was all on websites and stuff, I could see this game being a really fun experience and then totally worth that price point. In fact, I'd recommend this game over, because this is pretty much the first game that has a sporting element that I've liked, that I've reviewed. Super Sports Matching and some of the sports games I didn't enjoy as gameplay experiences. This isn't really a sports game, I'll grant you that, but considering that its core gameplay element is air hockey, I think it kind of counts. So in terms of a gameplay experience, it's second to none. The responsiveness and the fun of combat, the diversity of it is well worth a look, and I would highly recommend you check it out. But what do you think? Castle Break, have you played it? It's been out for about 6 or 7 months now, so there's a good to fair chance that if you've seen it, you might have been tempted to give it a go, especially considering that the aesthetics do kind of harken back to Shovel Knight a little bit. Have you played other air hockey games that maybe rival this one? I don't know. You're going to have to let me know in the comment section below, but I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching this edition of the Halcyon Show. Please like, share, and subscribe, and check out some of the other content created in the description below. Also, be sure to check out some of the other content that I've been producing recently. I hope you've been enjoying it. Also, feel free to go check me out on Defunct Games channel. We recently did a quiz. I'm not too sure if it's going to be up yet, but once it is, I'm going to take much delight in seeing him suffer. Let's just put it that way. In the meantime though, thank you very much again for watching. Thank you very much for Pauloodra for allowing me to review your game. It's much appreciated. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves. I've been your host, Lorne Risley. Feel free to follow me on Twitter @LorneRisley. And I'll see you on the next episode of The Halcyon Show.